In a quiet apartment just outside the heartbeat of Los Angeles, Jamie Harper sat alone at her small wooden desk. The early morning sunlight crept across stacks of papers and a half-drunk cup of tea. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but inside these walls, life moved more slowly, as if caught between what was and what might be. She worked as a teacher, shaping young minds by day, and by night, she surrendered herself to the hopeful solitude of writing. The stories she penned were pieces of herself, delicate and persistent, yet when the envelope from the publisher arrived that morning, the offer was almost laughable. They wanted her work, but barely valued it. Jamie folded the letter carefully, her hands steady, though her throat tightened. She had always promised herself she would never settle for the life that others had quietly prepared for her. There had to be more, something beyond polite routines and narrow expectations. And then, like sunlight slipping behind a cloud, the weight of memory pulled her gently backward, years into a past that still shimmered with life. The Harper house had never been grand, but it was filled to its beams with laughter, quarrels, and dreams stitched together by four sisters. On one particular afternoon, the home bustled with anticipation. Maya Harper, the eldest, spun nervously in front of the mirror as her sisters flurried around her. "Hold still, you're shaking the pins loose," Jamie teased as she tried to fasten the back of Maya's navy dress. "I feel like I'm walking into a room I don't belong in," Maya confessed, adjusting the neckline, her voice soft with uncertainty. "You do belong. You're leading the donation table, remember? It's a fundraiser, not a royal wedding," Jamie smiled, trying to soften her sister's nerves with humor. Their younger sister, Bella, hovered quietly by the family piano, her fingers tracing silent chords along the keys, a private comfort in the middle of the lively chaos. Bella rarely sought the center of attention. Music was her way of speaking without interruption. Meanwhile, Ava, the youngest, lingered by the doorway, clutching the edge of her sweater as she watched her older sisters prepare for the evening. She was not old enough to attend the event, though her longing to be included filled the room like an unspoken ache. That night, the fundraising event filled the community hall with soft music, polished speeches, and the scent of fresh lilies. Maya's role was modest but meaningful. She represented their family's long-standing commitment to local charities. Jamie, who had accompanied her, found herself quietly observing the crowd until Elon Musk stepped into her line of sight. He wasn't the kind of man who carried his importance on his sleeve. There was a calm about him, a curiosity in his eyes that seemed to peel back the edges of every room he entered. His grandfather, Mr. Musk, was a respected neighbor and benefactor in their town, but Elon himself moved through the evening without the weight of his name pressing down on him. Their first conversation began not with pleasantries, but with mischief. "I see you found the only chair that wobbles," Elon said, approaching as Jamie gently rocked back and forth, adjusting her balance on the uneven seat. "Well, I like a challenge," she replied, lifting an eyebrow. "Besides, I'd hate to see it left alone all night." His laughter was easy, warm. There was no pretense between them, as though they had known each other before they had ever spoken. They spent much of the evening in quiet corners, sharing glances that bordered on daring and conversations that pulled at the seams of their guarded hearts. But back at home, Ava sat on the staircase, listening to the clock tick its lonely rhythm. She imagined her sisters dancing, laughing, being seen. The ache of exclusion settled heavily on her shoulders, a feeling she would come to know intimately in the years that followed. Bella, as always, drifted to the piano after they returned home, letting her fingers release all the words she never spoke aloud. Music was her refuge, her gift, her quiet language. Through every season, their father, Michael Harper, remained the unwavering center of their world. He was a man of humble means, but vast compassion. He taught his daughters to give even when they had little, and to hold tightly to the things that money could never buy: integrity, kindness, family. One Christmas morning, Michael gently asked his daughters to give their carefully prepared breakfast to a nearby family in desperate need. There was no hesitation. They bundled the warm loaves, the butter, the sweet jam, and delivered them with their own hands. The joy they witnessed in that small home filled them in a way that no feast could have. Mr. Musk had watched them from afar for some time, quietly moved by their generosity and warmth. Over the months, Elon became more than a neighbor. He became a fixture in the Harper home, sharing in their stories, their joys, and their quiet battles. He belonged in the way that some people find their place not by invitation, but by simply fitting into the rhythm of a family. Yet for Ava, the youngest, there was always a shadow she couldn't quite step out of. She longed to be seen not just as the little sister, but as someone whose dreams mattered just as much. In all their struggles and shared triumphs, the Harper sisters wove their lives together with stubborn hope. They stitched their futures from humble fabric, daring to dream beyond the walls of their modest home. One evening, while sitting with Elon under a sky brushed with soft oranges and purples, Jamie confessed, "I don't want to follow the path everyone's drawn for me. I want more. I need to live beyond what's expected." Elon's reply was simple but steady. "Then go and find it. And if you ever wonder whether you're capable, remember, I already know you are." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it lingered in Jamie's heart long after the evening faded. These were their beginnings. Fragile, vibrant, imperfect. The bonds were forming, the seeds were quietly planted. And though this story is only unfolding, perhaps you've already seen glimmers of something familiar. Memories of your own beginnings, of family ties, of moments that stitched themselves into who you became. Dear viewer, if you'd like to walk further with me through this story, you are warmly invited to stay. I'd be grateful if you gently press the like button and consider subscribing, not because you must, but because stories grow richer when shared. After all, we're just getting started. Maya Harper had never been drawn to wealth, but she was learning that money had its own language, a language of silken handshakes, glances that lingered too long, and rooms that hummed with conversations she barely understood. At the high society party, she moved carefully among people who measured worth by what could be worn, displayed, or casually donated. It was a fundraiser of another kind, far from the humble events she was used to. There were no folding chairs or simple pastries here, only marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and champagne that never seemed empty. Maya had come at the request of Mr. Musk, who believed her grace and sincerity would appeal to the donors. She did not know whether to feel flattered or used. As she smiled politely, nodding at strangers who admired her poise but never asked about her life, she realized the party was a maze of polished words and delicate traps. For the first time, she felt the weight of being noticed, not for who she was, but for how seamlessly she fit their picture. Back home, Elon's visits became more frequent. He no longer felt like a guest, but like a thread woven into the fabric of the Harper household. He helped with errands, lingered over long conversations with Michael, and found reasons to stay just a little longer each time. With Jamie, his connection deepened, though it hovered in the tender space between friendship and something quietly blooming. He was drawn to her independence, to the way her mind seemed to spark against his. She challenged him, teased him, and yet there was always a softness when she spoke his name. But beneath the warmth, the Harper house carried its own flickers of unrest. Ava, desperate to be seen, struggled with the boundaries that came with being the youngest. At school, she had begun testing those limits, challenging her teachers, pushing against authority in ways that soon found her punished for insolence. When Jamie confronted her, Ava lashed out, her words sharp and reckless. "You only see me when I make mistakes," Ava hissed one evening, tears brimming but unfallen. "You always make me feel like I don't belong." Jamie, who had grown used to balancing patience with firmness, felt her resolve waver. She wanted to be a sister, but sometimes found herself sounding more like a scolding parent. The storm between them reached its peak in a moment Ava would regret almost instantly. Late one night, after another sharp exchange, Ava slipped quietly into Jamie's room. On her desk sat the glowing screen of Jamie's laptop, open to the draft of her first manuscript, a story Jamie had poured herself into for months. It wasn't just a file. It was the shape of her ambition, her secret hopes. Ava's jealousy, raw and unshaped, pushed her past the edge. With trembling fingers, she selected the file and pressed delete. It happened in a breath. A single decision that unraveled what Jamie had spent countless nights building. When Jamie discovered the loss, the devastation came not as an explosion, but as a hollowing. She sat before the empty screen, the cursor blinking in the silence like a heartbeat she could no longer feel. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply folded inwards as though something precious had slipped from her grasp and could never be retrieved. Michael found her hours later, her hands still resting on the keyboard, her breath shallow. "It was everything I had," she whispered, the words dragging against her throat. Michael knelt beside her, his voice steady. "Things can be rewritten, Jamie, even the worst chapters. But your heart, don't let it harden. Forgiveness is not a favor to others. It's a rescue for ourselves." It would take time for those words to settle. A few days later, the fragile piece of the house cracked again when Ava, in a playful sprint across the icy lake near their home, ventured too far. The thin ice gave way beneath her feet. There was no time to think, only to run. Jamie's lungs burned as she raced across the brittle surface, Elon just steps behind her. Together, they reached Ava's flailing arms, pulling her from the freezing water. The terror of that moment, the weight of her sister's soaked, trembling body in her arms, shattered the distance between them. That night, Ava sobbed into Jamie's shoulder, begging for forgiveness that had already quietly begun to take root. Their bond, once strained, was reforged in the crucible of near tragedy. In the days that followed, life folded forward in its persistent, unrelenting way. Maya, who had been distracted by the echo of that high society party, began to notice Daniel Carter, Elon's former tutor. He was not wealthy, nor particularly charming in a conventional sense, but his quiet attention, his steady presence, began to pull at something tender within her. Elon's affection for Jamie, no longer subtle, became more visible. The way his gaze lingered when she spoke, the way his laughter softened in her presence, there was little left to conceal. But Jamie, caught between her own guarded ambition and the warmth Elon offered, wasn't ready to accept what stood plainly between them. Then came news that shook the house. Their mother had fallen gravely ill while visiting a distant relative. Michael, without hesitation, departed to care for her, entrusting the girls to tend the home in his absence. The days turned heavy in his absence. Responsibilities thickened around them, and it was Bella, the quiet soul with music in her bones, who chose to give what little strength she had to the Kalaman family, a nearby household living in desperate poverty. She visited them daily, bringing bread, warmth, and patience. But compassion carries risk. Without knowing it, Bella contracted a severe form of antibiotic-resistant pneumonia from the children she cared for. Her cough began as a whisper, but soon became a rasp that lingered in the walls of the Harper home. Doctors came. Medicine was tried. Worry threaded itself into every breath the sisters took. To protect Ava from the risk of infection, they sent her to live temporarily with Uncle Harper, though the separation brought a new ache. She had just found her place again, only to be asked to step away. And so the sisters gathered around Bella, their days marked by the rhythm of her breathing, by the quiet prayers that filled the house. They wrapped themselves in blankets of hope, in the fragile belief that love might be enough to pull her through. But even as shadows crept across their days, the bond between them held firm, tested, stretched, but never broken. The Harper home had always felt full of laughter, of worry, of dreams stitched together by threadbare routines, but now it felt smaller, as though the walls had drawn closer. Their mother's illness had drained what little savings they had, and Bella's fragile health pressed down on the house like a storm that refused to pass. One afternoon, when the quiet had settled too heavily, Jamie Harper walked to town with a purpose she could hardly say aloud. She entered the small, sunlit shop with trembling resolve, and without much ceremony, asked the hairdresser to cut her long chestnut waves. She watched as each strand fell away, collecting on the floor like scattered pages of a story she wasn't ready to finish. The weight of her hair gone, Jamie folded the small payment into her coat pocket. It wasn't much, but it would help cover their mother's medicine, and perhaps it would help keep the walls from closing in entirely. When their mother finally returned home, she was pale, her frame thinned by sickness, but her eyes glistened with quiet gratitude. She embraced each daughter as though committing their faces to memory. Her touch lingered on Jamie's shortened hair, her voice soft. "You've given so much of yourself." Jamie only smiled. There's always more to give. For a while, there was hope. Bella's health improved, her coughing easing, her color returning just enough to let them believe the worst had passed. The sisters, still tender from weeks of worry, clung to that fragile relief, daring to imagine days without the sharp edge of fear. While the house found its rhythm again, Ava thrived under the watchful guidance of Uncle Harper. Far from the shadows of being the youngest, Ava bloomed in a new environment where she was treated not as a child, but as someone with her own place in the world. She learned grace, patience, the quiet skills of refinement that softened her restless edges. Letters from her arrived often, filled with careful handwriting and stories of small triumphs. Back home, Elon's visits became more insistent. His affection for Jamie no longer hid behind quiet gestures. He would linger in the doorway long after the others had gone, his gaze steady, his words carefully chosen. "You must know by now," he said one evening, as the late light painted gold across the porch. "I want to build something with you. A life. A future." Jamie looked out toward the fading horizon. Part of her longed to lean into what he offered, a safe love, familiar and steadfast. But another part of her, a louder, unrelenting part, ached for more. "I can't," she whispered, her voice thick with regret, but firm in its truth. "I can't be who you need me to be." Elon's breath faltered, but he did not press her. Instead, he offered a sad, understanding smile, the kind that marks the boundary between what is wanted and what is. Shortly after, he departed for Europe. His letters came for a time, but distance is a patient thief, and soon, even his handwriting became unfamiliar. Jamie, restless and untethered, felt the walls of her life tightening again. She loved her family, but the weight of their traditions, their quiet expectations, pressed heavily against her ribs. She wanted words, cities, stories that stretched beyond the borders of her childhood. So she made her own departure. Los Angeles had always called to her like an unfinished sentence, and now she would go, even if the cost was leaving the only home she'd ever known. Ava, growing under Uncle Harper's careful watch, also ventured abroad, accompanying him to Europe. Her letters soon spoke of chance encounters with Elon, of familiar conversations rekindled in foreign streets, of a friendship that began to tilt into something more. In Los Angeles, the city pulsed with a rhythm that thrilled and intimidated Jamie in equal measure. It was there she met Ethan Blake, a professor whose critiques stung and challenged her in ways she hadn't expected. He was not gentle in his assessments, but neither was he cruel. He pushed her to write not what might sell, but what might last. "You can't hide behind pretty sentences," he told her once, after reading one of her drafts. "Say what you mean, even if it costs you." His words lingered, unsettling but necessary. Jamie began to rebuild the manuscript she had lost, this time with sharper edges and less apology. She sent it to publishers who returned it with polite rejections, form letters that bore no trace of the people who had written them. She persisted, though the silence between submissions often echoed louder than the words she put to the page. Back home, Maya, too, stood at a crossroads. Daniel Carter had proposed, offering her a life that shimmered with comfort and stability. Maya hesitated, wary of the trappings of wealth, of the way it might slowly reshape her. But in Daniel's steady patience, she found something she could trust, and with a trembling heart, she accepted. Jamie watched from afar, through letters and updates, as her sisters carved paths that diverged from hers. She worried, not out of envy, but out of a quiet fear that their bond, once so fierce and intertwined, might thin under the weight of distance and the pull of separate lives. The ache of that possibility settled in the quiet spaces of her days, between the lessons she taught and the stories she tried to tell. Elon's departure had left a hollow she rarely admitted to herself, but even more than him, it was the slow drift of her sisters that unsettled her most. Still, she pressed forward, the words pulling at her, the city's restless heartbeat urging her to keep going. She was chasing something she could not yet name. Something larger than expectation, something beyond the carefully drawn lines of her girlhood. And though the road stretched uncertain before her, she had already chosen. She would walk it, step by trembling step, toward whatever waited beyond. In Europe, where streets curled through old cities and cafe windows steamed against the morning chill, Elon Musk and Ava Harper found themselves quietly, unexpectedly drawn into each other's company. What began as polite encounters, shared dinners arranged by Uncle Harper, brief conversations after community events, gradually deepened into something neither of them had anticipated. Elon, still carrying the gentle ache of Jamie's refusal, discovered in Ava a surprising source of comfort. She was no longer the impatient girl who had trailed behind her sisters. Ava had grown into her opinions, into her silence, into her questions about the kind of life she wanted for herself. She challenged Elon, but in a different way than Jamie had. Where Jamie had pushed him to dream beyond comfort, Ava urged him to stand firm, to find contentment in presence, not just ambition. Yet there were shadows between them. Elon's heart, though healing, still tilted toward Jamie in quiet moments. Ava noticed it in the way he hesitated before speaking, in the distant pause that sometimes overtook his gaze. It gnawed at her, not jealousy, but a longing to be seen fully, without comparison. Across the ocean, Jamie Harper settled into the cadence of her Los Angeles life. She continued to work under Professor Ethan Blake, a man who refused to let her hide behind polished sentences. His feedback was rarely gentle. He demanded more from her stories, pressing her to reach for depth, for truth she had long been afraid to write. "You're skimming the surface," Ethan told her one afternoon, setting her pages aside. "You write as though you're afraid of your own voice." Jamie bristled, but the words struck something real. She realized she had been chasing admiration, not meaning. She had been constructing beautiful facades, safe stories that never risked too much. Ethan's challenges lingered, unsettling but strangely freeing. Meanwhile, Maya Harper made her own quiet revolution. She married Daniel Carter in a ceremony that was simple, surrounded by those who loved her not for her grace in social circles, but for her steadfast heart. In Daniel, she chose love over wealth, depth over glitter. And in that choice, she found a version of happiness that felt entirely her own. But Jamie's peace in Los Angeles was soon interrupted. News from home arrived like a breath knocked from her chest. Bella's health had worsened. Without hesitation, Jamie returned. Bella's decline was slow but undeniable. The light in her eyes dimmed with the passing days, though her spirit remained impossibly tender. Jamie stayed close, tending to her sister with hands that had once crafted stories, but now only wanted to ease another's breathing. Their conversations softened, folding into the kind of intimacy that surfaces when time begins to feel limited. One evening, Bella reached for Jamie's hand, her voice faint but steady. "You always wanted to write stories that mattered. Maybe the story that matters most is the one you're living." Jamie's throat tightened, words caught between sorrow and understanding. Bella's quiet acceptance of her fate taught Jamie something she had never dared to learn before: how to let go, how to sit beside grief without trying to fix it, how to honor love in the shape of presence. Far away, Ava matured under the European skies, her once restless spirit settling into clarity. She began to see Elon not as her sister's shadow, but as someone quietly standing beside her, waiting, not for the echo of Jamie, but for her. Elon too shifted. His feelings, once tangled, became unmistakably clear. The grief he had carried was not a wall. It had been a door waiting to be opened. On a quiet street in Florence, beneath the soft hush of twilight, he turned to Ava with a sincerity that needed no grand words. "I thought I was waiting for someone else," he confessed, "but I see you now. And I want to choose you." Ava, who had spent so long longing to be chosen, now stood firmly in the knowledge that she was worthy on her own terms. She accepted his proposal, not because it mended the past, but because it promised a future they would build together. Back home, time slipped quietly away from Bella. The day she passed, the house fell into a hush that clung to the walls like mist. The family mourned deeply, their hearts aching not just for her absence, but for the softness she had given them. Jamie grieved with a weight that settled into her bones. But as days unfolded into slow, deliberate rhythms, she found herself returning to her writing, not as a distraction, but as a refuge. Bella's life, her quiet bravery, her unwavering kindness, these threads wove themselves into the stories Jamie now poured onto the page. Her words no longer reached for admiration. They reached for honesty. Grief and hope lived side by side in her writing. And in this, Jamie began to find a new purpose, not to chase some distant idea of success, but to create something enduring, something that spoke to the hearts that had weathered joy and sorrow alike. Elon and Ava eventually returned home, now married, their bond forged in the patient unfolding of time. There was no awkwardness, no lingering shadows when they saw Jamie again. Their lives had diverged, but their connection, rooted in years of shared memories and quiet resilience, remained. They settled into a familiar rhythm, the family drawing close once more, now bound not by proximity, but by choice, by the enduring promise to carry each other through the seasons that would follow. For Jamie, a quiet realization bloomed within her. Love, she understood now, was not just the passionate declarations or the singular storylines she had once imagined. Love was the patience of sitting beside someone in their hardest moments. Love was leaving and returning. Love was choosing over and over to be present. And for the first time, her ambition felt less like a race and more like a home she could build, one word at a time. In the quiet mornings that followed Bella's passing, Jamie Harper found herself returning to the worn desk in her room, the same desk where her stories had once flickered and faded under the weight of rejection. This time, her words did not chase grand adventures or distant cities. Instead, they turned inward, flowing from the memories that had been carefully folded into the corners of her heart. She wrote about Bella's soft piano melodies, about Ava's defiant spirit, about the slow rhythm of family breakfasts and the summer evenings spent under the old tree in their backyard. She poured her heart into these stories, not to escape her life, but to understand it, to preserve the fragile, beautiful weight of what they had shared. One crisp afternoon, Ethan Blake arrived at the Harper home. His presence unsettled the stillness in ways Jamie had not expected. He was no longer just a distant professor. Here, within the walls of her childhood, he became something else, familiar, almost tender. He listened to the stories Michael and Maya told over dinner, offered to help Daniel mend a creaking porch step, and joined Jamie for long, quiet walks where the silences between them said more than words. Meanwhile, Ava and Elon settled into the rhythms of married life. Their connection, which had bloomed slowly in Europe, now found its place in the gentle rituals of home, morning coffees shared in the kitchen, whispered conversations as they folded laundry, the ease of moving around each other in a house that had once belonged to their childhood selves. Jamie watched them, not with envy, but with a quiet acceptance that surprised her. Where once she might have felt the sting of what could have been, now she simply admired the life they were building, a life grounded in choice, in patience, in the kind of love that didn't need to announce itself loudly to be real. Her father, Michael Harper, remained a steady source of comfort. One evening, as Jamie sat beside him on the porch, she spoke of her lingering questions, of the life paths she hadn't taken, of the faint ache she couldn't fully name. Love, Michael told her, his voice warm but certain, isn't one road. It's 1,000 small doors we walk through, sometimes without even noticing. You've already loved well, Jamie, in your family, in your work, in your care for others. That's enough. It's always been enough. His words settled into her like warm rain. Maya and Daniel, now parents, face their own quiet storms, midnight feedings, financial worries, the slow, stretching patience of raising children. But even in their exhaustion, they found joy in the little things, the scribbled drawings taped to the fridge, the chaotic laughter of toddlers chasing each other through the halls, the rare moments of silence that they guarded like treasure. As the seasons turned, Jamie began to see Ethan in a new, more tender light. His edges, once sharp in her mind, softened as she watched him navigate the rhythms of her family with quiet grace. He was steady, thoughtful, and somehow always knew when to offer space and when to step closer. The Harper family continued to heal, weaving Bella's memory gently into the fabric of their daily lives. No one spoke of her absence as something to be locked away. Instead, they kept her alive in small rituals. Maya played soft piano pieces in the evenings, Ava sometimes wore Bella's old scarf, and Michael continued to visit Bella's favorite bench by the lake, now their shared place of remembrance. It was Ethan who gently nudged Jamie toward a new horizon in her writing. "You spent so much time writing what you thought people wanted," he told her, "but your real stories, the ones about your family, about grief, about the quiet battles, they're the ones people need." Jamie hesitated. Writing about her family felt raw, exposed. But something in Ethan's words rang true. She began writing with fervor, blending grief and hope into her narrative. The words came with more ease now, less concerned with perfection, more with honesty. Her sisters supported her unflinchingly. Ava read her drafts late into the night, offering thoughtful suggestions. Elon, too, read her work, his support open and unguarded, his friendship steady as ever. When Jamie finally submitted her manuscript, a collection of intertwined family stories, it felt like offering a part of her soul to the world. But this time, when the publisher responded, it wasn't with polite dismissal. It was with genuine admiration. They wanted her stories as they were. Her voice had found its place. Just as Jamie began to feel the ground settle beneath her feet, life offered another bittersweet turn. Uncle Harper passed away quietly, leaving behind the family estate, a home that had, over the years, become more than just a house. It was where Ava had grown, where Elon had first become part of their lives, where Jamie's own story had begun to unfold. When the legal papers arrived, naming Jamie as the heir, the weight of it pressed into her chest. But beneath the grief, a vision began to form. She walked the halls of the estate one late afternoon, the sunlight casting soft gold across the wooden floors. She touched the door frames, glanced at the high windows, the quiet, spacious rooms. What if this place could become more than a memory? What if it could be filled with new voices, with children who needed what the Harper home had always quietly offered: safety, belonging, hope? The idea came not as a thunderclap, but as a steady pulse, a school, a place of learning, of stories, of growing, a way to weave her family's legacy into the future. It would be hard. It would demand more than she could yet imagine. But standing in that quiet house, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: a beginning, a new path, a gentle goodbye to what had been, a door slowly opening. The house that once belonged to Uncle Harper had always carried a kind of silent dignity. Its rooms, though quiet, seemed to remember footsteps, laughter, long-forgotten dinners, and seasons gone by. Now, as Jamie Harper paced its worn wooden floors, she imagined those rooms filled with children's voices, chalk dust floating in sunlight, and lessons that would shape more than just knowledge. Turning her vision into reality demanded more than dreams. Jamie worked tirelessly, drafting proposals, meeting with town leaders, and carefully planning each corner of what would become the school. She did not chase grandeur. She wanted a place that felt like home, humble, safe, a refuge where learning could take root gently. Her sisters Maya and Ava and Elon stood behind her with quiet determination. They helped clear the garden, repainted old rooms, and coordinated with neighbors willing to offer support. Maya, now fully immersed in the rhythms of family life, balanced her days between raising her children and encouraging Jamie's growing ambition. Ava, with her calm resolve, became a bridge to the community, her own journey into motherhood unfolding softly in the background. Elon was especially present. He had become not just a brother-in-law, but a steadfast friend, one who knew when to offer advice and when to simply hold the silence. One evening, as they walked the estate's grounds, Elon paused, his gaze steady. "You haven't written to Ethan," he said, not as an accusation, but as a quiet observation. Jamie exhaled, watching the breeze play through the leaves. "I wouldn't know what to say." "You'd know," Elon replied gently. "You always know what to say when it matters." She smiled faintly, grateful for his insight, but the hesitation lingered. Ethan Blake had returned to Los Angeles, his departure leaving a hollow she hadn't dared to name. His absence echoed in the unfinished conversations, in the way her thoughts drifted toward him when she worked late into the evening. Jamie struggled with the unfamiliar weight of wanting someone. She knew how to build, to lead, to write, but to admit her heart's leaning, to risk being vulnerable, was a lesson she had never fully studied. As the weeks passed, the school began to take shape. Volunteers came, neighbors, former teachers, even local carpenters who offered their time to repair broken beams and sand wooden desks. The community, sensing the heart behind Jamie's vision, quietly folded itself around her mission. Michael watched his daughter with deep pride. He saw in her the continuation of everything he and his late wife had believed in: kindness, purpose, the courage to follow a calling even when the road felt uncertain. One morning, as Jamie sorted through old books in the study, a letter arrived. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Ethan. His words were careful, but not distant. He wrote of the city, of his students, of quiet moments where his thoughts drifted, always back to the Harper home. He confessed that he admired her courage, not just in building the school, but in how she chose to live fully, even when grief had pressed hard against her. "You build things that last, Jamie," he wrote, "and I find myself wanting to stand beside you as you do." She read the letter more than once, her fingers lingering on the edges as if the paper might carry his voice. Still, she did not write back. Perhaps she feared that putting her feelings to paper would make them too real, too exposed. Meanwhile, Ava's life gently blossomed. Motherhood softened her restlessness, grounding her in quiet joys. The baby's laughter filled corners of the house that had long held silence. Elon, steady as ever, moved through these new chapters with grace, finding happiness in the simple rituals of family. Maya's days unfolded with the steady rhythm of home. Meals cooked, lessons taught, small quarrels mended, bedtime stories read beneath soft lamplight. She had not chosen the grandeur once offered to her. She had chosen love, simplicity, and the extraordinary beauty found in the ordinary. Just as Jamie settled into this growing life, Ethan returned. His arrival was unannounced, but not unwelcome. He appeared one late afternoon, walking up the familiar path to the house, his expression calm but searching. He carried no grand declarations, only the quiet weight of unfinished things. Jamie met him on the porch, her heart caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. Neither rushed to speak. The air between them was steady, patient. "I thought you might never come back," Jamie said softly. "I wasn't sure you wanted me to," Ethan admitted, his voice low but sure. "I did," she confessed. "I do." His gray eyes, flecked with blue, lingered on her, the question unspoken but answered in the way her gaze held his. "Would you stay?" she asked, her voice no longer hesitant. "I would," he said, "if you'll have me." The conversation settled between them like a well-loved book finally finding its rightful place on the shelf. Their story did not need urgency. It unfolded in the quiet acceptance that both had already chosen each other long before the words had been spoken. In the weeks that followed, Ethan became part of the school's foundation, offering to teach literature and gently guiding young minds. His partnership with Jamie extended beyond the classrooms. They built a life of shared purpose, a rhythm where love was not a grand gesture, but steady presence. The Harper sisters gathered one bright spring afternoon to celebrate the progress of the school. Children's laughter echoed through the once empty halls, and the house that had carried so many of their memories now held the beginnings of others. They walked the grounds together, Maya, Ava, Jamie, their arms occasionally brushing, their steps in sync. Michael watched them from the porch, his heart full, knowing his daughters had woven a life that honored the past but reached confidently into the future. As the evening light settled gently over the estate, Jamie felt something she had long pursued without fully understanding it: contentment. Her life was not the story she had imagined as a girl. It was better. It was real. It was hers. The day the school opened, the old house finally felt whole again. It was no longer a place of stillness, but a sanctuary alive with the hurried footsteps of children, the soft shuffle of papers, and the warm hum of voices weaving new stories into its walls. Jamie Harper walked the halls with quiet satisfaction, pausing by classroom doors to listen as young voices filled the spaces that had once been so achingly silent. The school welcomed children from every corner of the community, some wide-eyed and eager, some cautious and unsure, but all of them hungry for a place where they could grow. Jamie flourished as a teacher, balancing gentle discipline with a steady compassion that had been shaped by her own years of longing, loss, and discovery. She offered patience where the world had often been sharp, structure where chaos threatened to spill over, and a sense of belonging to those who needed it most. Her classroom wasn't just about lessons, it was a quiet promise that someone believed in them. In the home beyond the school walls, Elon and Ava embraced the quiet rhythms of parenting. Elon, once known for his sharp mind and restless ambition, now found peace in the simple rituals of fatherhood: bedtime stories read with unhurried care, tiny shoes tied with steady hands, the wonder of small hands reaching for his. Ava bloomed in these moments, her restless energy softened into a steady, nurturing joy. Together, they built a home marked not by grandeur, but by quiet, enduring love. Maya and Daniel Carter guided their growing children with tenderness and resolve, teaching them not to chase status, but to live with humility and kindness. Their home became a haven of thoughtful conversations, playful afternoons, and gentle corrections offered with love. Through all these shifting seasons, Ethan and Jamie built a life that was neither hurried nor distant, but rich in quiet, deliberate moments. They balanced their work at the school with their shared home, where days were measured not by accomplishments, but by the texture of ordinary life. Cups of tea on the porch, stacks of student essays read by lamplight, long walks through the estate's garden, where words were few, but connection was deep. Bella's absence was still felt, but it had softened into something tender, a presence woven through Jamie's teaching, her writing, her very sense of what it meant to care for others. Bella's memory became a quiet cornerstone of the school's values, her compassion a living legacy that shaped how Jamie welcomed each new student. When Jamie's first novel was published, a story that followed the intricate, imperfect, and beautiful journey of four sisters, it quickly gained literary acclaim. Reviewers praised its warmth, its depth, its honesty. But for Jamie, the true success was not in the praise, but in the way the story preserved the heart of her family. In the dedication, she wrote, "For my sisters, whose love shaped the woman I have become." Especially for Bella, whose quiet courage taught me how to hold on and how to let go. Ava, inspired by the book, painted a portrait of the sisters, not as they had been in childhood, but as they were now, women with histories carved into their faces, with lines that told of grief, joy, and the relentless passing of time. The painting became a symbol of their evolving story, of who they had been and who they continued to become. Elon, ever steadfast, remained Jamie's closest confidant. Their bond, which had transformed from affection to friendship, never wavered. He offered advice, laughter, and a steady presence, the kind of brotherhood built not from blood, but from years of shared journeys. Michael, watching his daughters from the gentle distance of aging fatherhood, beamed with pride. He saw in them the full arc of the life he had tried to give, a life not without hardship, but rich with meaning, courage, and love. Jamie often found herself reflecting on how far they had all come. Time, she realized, had not taken from her. It had reshaped her, folding her losses into new chapters, her joys into something deeper than she had known to ask for. Gratitude settled into her bones, steady and warm. One quiet evening, as the sunlight stretched long across the porch, Ethan proposed a modest expansion of the school. A few more classrooms, a library, perhaps a garden where students could learn from the soil as well as from books. Jamie smiled, her heart full. "Let's build it," she said simply, knowing the greatest work was always the kind that grew slowly, intentionally with care. The Harper sisters gathered often now, not as girls caught between dreams and duty, but as women who had each carved out lives that were fiercely their own. They shared stories over evening meals, their children playing nearby, their laughter soft but steady. They spoke of their mother, of Bella, of Uncle Harper, weaving the past into their present without fear of its weight. The house, once a quiet inheritance, now pulsed with life. Its halls echoed with the footsteps of children, the low murmur of lessons, the ringing notes of youthful laughter. What had once been a place of farewells had become a sanctuary of beginnings. Jamie stood often by the window in the evenings, watching the light stretch across the familiar grounds. The porch where Elon had once proposed, the tree under which Bella had loved to read, the path where Ethan had first returned, all of it remained, not as fixed points in time, but as living spaces where love, grief, and hope had passed through, lingered, and moved forward. Her life was not the one she had imagined as a child. It was not the life of distant adventures or literary acclaim measured by cities and stages. It was better. It was real. It was full of the kind of richness that grows slowly, season by season, built with hands that know how to hold on and how to let go. And as the seasons changed around her, Jamie Harper moved through them with quiet joy, knowing she had found the place where she belonged. The school, once a quiet dream whispered in the lonely halls of Uncle Harper's estate, had become a living, breathing sanctuary. It was no longer just a building. It was a rhythm, a pulse that echoed with the footsteps of curious children, the soft murmur of pages turning, and the lively questions of those hungry to learn. Jamie Harper moved through its halls with purpose. Her days were filled with more than just lessons. She wove compassion and resilience into every corner of the school. The students knew that within these walls, they were safe, valued, and seen. Jamie taught them literature and life skills, yes, but more than that, she taught them to find their voice, to see their own stories as worthy of being told. Ethan Blake found his own rhythm within the school, teaching languages with patient precision. His classroom brimmed with maps, stories from distant places, and conversations that challenged his students to look beyond what they already knew. Yet, it wasn't only the languages he taught that stayed with him. It was his steady belief that they could grow, that their futures were theirs to shape. The school, though firmly rooted in its mission, never drifted far from its family origins. Maya, Ava, Elon, and Daniel visited often, their presence folding effortlessly into the fabric of the place. The children of the school adored them, especially Elon, who often arrived with small, unexpected gifts, his pockets filled with puzzles and stories, his laughter steady and easy. The sisters celebrated each other's triumphs without reservation. Maya's home blossomed with the energy of her growing children, her days a careful balance of guidance and gentle freedom. Ava's art deepened, each brushstroke speaking of a woman who had finally learned to create without apology. Elon's quiet investments ensured the school would endure well beyond their time, his steady support allowing Jamie to focus on her calling without the weight of financial fear. Michael Harper, now in his older years, watched all of this unfold with quiet wonder. He spent his days surrounded by the people he loved most, his grandchildren tugging at his hands, his daughters' voices filling the house with stories, both old and new. He never spoke of his pride in grand terms, but in the way his eyes lingered a moment longer on each of them, it was clear. Jamie's second book found its way into the world during this season, a work inspired not by her own childhood this time, but by her students. It was a story of growth, of perseverance, of what it meant to build something lasting. The community embraced it, their hearts warmed by the familiar echoes within its pages. In those quiet moments between lessons and family dinners, Jamie often found herself thinking of Bella. Sometimes, when the school was hushed in the late afternoons, she imagined she could still hear the faint trace of Bella's piano melodies floating through the halls. The memory was no longer sharp with grief, but soft, a gentle thread woven through her days. Ethan and Jamie shaped the school together, crafting an environment where every child felt known and cared for. They held storytelling nights in the garden, language games in the sunlit classrooms, and long, wandering walks across the school grounds where children could dream out loud. The garden itself became a sacred place, not just for the children, but for the sisters. Jamie, Maya, and Ava would often sit together there, surrounded by flowers that had been planted over years of seasons. They reminisced about their childhood, their games, their quarrels, their shared hopes. They spoke of their mother, of Uncle Harper, of Bella. They laughed over memories of Ava's stubbornness, Maya's careful plans, Jamie's fiery resolve. In those moments, they were simply sisters again, without the weight of responsibility, without the expectations that had once pressed so heavily against them. As Jamie sat among them, she marveled at the winding paths their lives had taken. None of them had walked the road they had imagined as young girls, but each had carved something uniquely meaningful, a life stitched together by love, by grief, by small, quiet choices that became the foundation of who they were. The school flourished, its walls expanding to hold more stories, its name becoming quietly respected beyond their town. It was never about fame or prestige. It was about creating a home, a space where each child could feel safe enough to dream and strong enough to reach. One evening, as the sky painted itself in soft pinks and golds, Ethan and Jamie walked the grounds together. The breeze carried the distant laughter of children and the faint scent of lavender from the garden. They said little, but the silence was warm, familiar, a shared language that needed no explanation. Ethan paused, looking out across the fields, the schoolhouse glowing gently in the fading light. "We built something good here," he said softly. Jamie, her hazel eyes reflecting the last traces of sunlight, nodded. "Yes, we did." She slipped her hand into his, feeling the quiet certainty of this life they had shaped. It wasn't the life of her restless girlhood. It was something deeper, something earned. They walked on, side by side, their steps easy, their hearts content in the knowledge that they had come full circle, not by returning to the past, but by carrying its best parts forward. The house that had once been a place of endings had become a place of beginnings. And Jamie, as the evening settled gently around her, knew that this blend of memory, purpose, and steady love was exactly where she was meant to be. Spring arrived quietly that year, not with grand gestures, but with the slow, patient blooming of the school's garden, the gentle warmth that lingered in the air, and the familiar hum of children's laughter spilling through open windows. For Jamie Harper, each new season brought not only new students, but new stories, and this one felt especially full of promise. She welcomed the incoming class with her usual blend of firm kindness and open curiosity, her hazel eyes bright as she read each name aloud on the first day. Some of the children arrived shy, their shoulders tense, and their voices soft. Others were bold, restless, and eager to test boundaries. Jamie recognized them all. She had once been all of them. Ethan Blake introduced new teaching methods that immediately captured the children's attention. His lessons stretched beyond textbooks, weaving games, stories, and lively discussions into every subject. His quiet humor and thoughtful patience quickly earned him their admiration. Even the most hesitant students found themselves leaning forward, their curiosity pulling them into the lessons. Elon and Ava continued to be a steady presence, their visits frequent and full of gentle support. Elon's investments had begun to bear fruit, allowing the school to expand its facilities and welcome even more students. New classrooms were added, bright and open, filled with sunlight and the promise of possibility. Maya encouraged her children to fully embrace the life of the school. They joined clubs, volunteered in the garden, and took part in storytelling nights, slowly weaving themselves into the fabric of the school's daily rhythm. Through their quiet participation, Maya found joy, knowing her children were growing within the same walls that had shaped her and her sisters. One student in particular caught Jamie's attention, a boy named Caleb, whose sharp tongue and restless energy reminded her of her own younger self. He challenged rules, bristled at correction, and often sat at the edge of the classroom as though poised to flee. But Jamie saw through the noise to the heart of him, a boy who had already built his armor long before she ever called his name on the first day of school. She chose patience. She chose understanding. She chose him. Through slow conversations, extra time after class, and a careful balance of discipline and trust, she reached him. Caleb began to soften, to ask questions instead of push boundaries, to linger in his seat a little longer at the end of each day. Jamie realized with quiet clarity that sometimes the children who resist the most are the ones who long the deepest to be seen. Ava brought new life to the school's creative spaces. Her art classes for the younger children were filled with color and soft laughter, but she also taught discipline, how to blend technique with imagination, how to stay with a piece long after it became uncomfortable. Her students learned that beauty often required persistence. The school blossomed, not just in numbers, but in spirit. Ethan and Jamie hosted evening storytelling gatherings where students, parents, and neighbors gathered under lantern-lit trees to listen and share. These nights became cherished rituals where generations met on common ground through tales of adventure, kindness, and courage. In the quieter hours, Jamie still turned to Michael Harper, her father, for steady guidance. He often sat on the school's porch, his eyes following the children as they played, his voice soft but unwavering. "Be careful, Jamie," he would remind her. "You can pour yourself into your work, but don't forget to leave room for your own heart to breathe." His words settled into her slowly, becoming a quiet thread she pulled through her days. As spring unfolded, Jamie found herself reflecting often on the cycles of her life, the seasons of loss and the seasons of growth, the ebb and flow of beginnings and farewells. She had once feared these cycles, thinking them too fragile, too painful. Now she understood their quiet power. They shaped her, but they didn't break her. One afternoon, Ethan led her to the entrance of the school where a new wooden sign stood waiting, its edges smooth and the letters carved with loving care. Jamie traced the grooves of the words with her fingertips. "The Harper School, a place to begin again." "It's ours," Ethan said simply, his voice low, steady. "A piece of both of us." Jamie smiled, her chest full, her heart steady. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. Joy deepened when Ava and Elon's child officially joined the school's youngest class, their family story folding into the next generation with quiet grace. Maya's children, too, continued to grow into thoughtful, kind students, their mother's steady teachings reflected in their daily choices. The school, which had once felt like a fragile dream, now pulsed with life and purpose. The walls carried the sound of new stories, the classrooms filled with the vibrant energy of discovery. The Harper family gathered often within these walls, creating new traditions, celebration lunches, garden picnics, shared stories after long weeks. For Jamie, these gatherings stitched time together, old memories and new, joy and grief, beginnings and continuations. Sitting at a table surrounded by her sisters, Ethan, Elon, their children, and the ever-present hum of the school, she realized something quietly profound. Her story was not a finished arc. It was still unfolding, still rich with chapters yet to be written. It was a life more intricate, more beautiful than she had ever dared to imagine. The rhythm of the Harper School had settled into something familiar, something that hummed quietly through its halls. But Jamie Harper knew well that even most carefully tended places could be tested. Her patience, her principles, and her vision were tested when a student named Daniel Price repeatedly challenged her authority. He was bright, brilliant even, but his sharp tongue and restless energy often upended the careful balance of the classroom. He provoked teachers, disrupted lessons, and seemed to thrive on the friction he created. His presence divided the faculty, many believing he should be expelled. Jamie sat at her desk late into the night, reading the formal complaints, feeling the weight of the decision pressing into her ribs. When she shared her concerns with Ethan, his response was calm, his deep gray eyes thoughtful. "You always saw something in the students no one else did. Don't stop now. Maybe Daniel is waiting for someone not to give up on him." Jamie wanted to believe that, but the strain on the school, on the other students, was real. She turned to her sisters for counsel. Ava reminded her that compassion could wear many shapes. "Sometimes we teach best when we set firm limits, but sometimes we need to be the first person to stay." Maya, always measured, urged Jamie to think not only of Daniel but of the community as a whole. "One life cannot eclipse the many, but if you believe he can change, that's the path you must follow." Elon offered his steady wisdom when Jamie confided in him during a walk through the schoolyard. "Don't try to win him over with power," he said gently. "Offer him responsibility instead. Make him part of what he's trying to tear apart." It was, Jamie realized, the only way forward that sat well with her heart. She invited Daniel to her office, not to scold, but to offer him a place, an actual role within the school. She asked him to help manage the younger students during afternoon sessions, to become a protector rather than a provocateur. At first, Daniel balked, but slowly, under the quiet weight of trust, he changed. It was not a straight path, but Jamie's patience began to bear fruit, and soon Daniel became a steady hand among the very children he used to disrupt. As the term unfolded, Ava found moments to return to her own craft, her brush once again moving across canvas. She began work on a portrait of Jamie, not as the girl she once was, but as the woman she had become, a teacher, a sister, a guardian of stories. Jamie's own days became a careful balance between the demands of the school and the pull of her next book. Her nights stretched long, filled with the quiet scratch of pen on paper as she wove her family's evolving legacy into new stories. Maya's children faced their own challenges. There were struggles at school, moments of self-doubt, and the growing pains that come with stepping into adolescence. Jamie offered them the same patience she offered her students, guiding them with a soft hand and steady voice. It brought the family closer, their bonds tightening in subtle, daily ways. Yet beneath the busy rhythm of the school, a quieter concern grew. Michael Harper's health began to decline. It was not dramatic, but it was steady, a slower gait, a deeper fatigue, a softness in his voice that hadn't been there before. The sisters noticed. They drew closer to him, creating more reasons to gather, to share simple meals, to linger over familiar conversations. Jamie found herself sitting with him more often on the porch, his stories gently repeated, his advice offered with fewer words, but greater weight. "You've built something good here," he told her one afternoon, his weathered hand resting over hers. "But don't forget, Jamie, life isn't only made of what you build. It's also made of what you sit still long enough to cherish." The school community flourished in those months. Ethan and Jamie organized a community festival, inviting families, neighbors, and former students to celebrate not just academic growth, but the shared spirit of the place. The schoolyard filled with colorful banners, music, and the bright laughter of children darting between booths. During the festival, Ava revealed she was pregnant again, her eyes glowing with the quiet joy of new life, her hand resting softly on her belly. The news rippled through the family, bringing warmth and excitement. Elon's quiet financial support allowed the school to weather an unexpectedly harsh winter. His foresight and generosity ensured that no student would be turned away, that no program would falter under the strain of the season. Through it all, Jamie and Ethan's bond deepened, not through grand declarations, but in the gentle, daily work of teaching, parenting, and building a life side by side. They shared quiet breakfasts, long walks through snow-dusted gardens, and the easy rhythm of a love that had settled into certainty. One crisp winter morning, a former student, Caleb, now grown, returned to visit Jamie. He stood in her office, taller, more composed, his eyes holding the steady light of someone who had found his way. "You stayed when you didn't have to," he told her, "and that changed everything." His words settled in her heart like a long-awaited letter. Jamie's nights became her sacred time. She wrote late into the evenings, her pen weaving the stories of her family, her students, her community. She no longer wrote for recognition, but for remembrance, for the quiet preservation of the moments that had shaped them all. One evening, as snow gathered softly outside, the sisters sat together by the fire. They spoke of their children, of the school, of their father's gentle presence, of Ava's growing family. They laughed, they lingered, they leaned into each other's warmth. There were no grand announcements, no life-altering decisions. Just the soft, steady comfort of being together, of knowing that through all the changes, all the seasons, they remained the heart of each other's story. Jamie Harper never wrote for recognition. She wrote to remember, to preserve, to gently thread the stories of her family and her students into something that could endure beyond the seasons of her own life. And yet, the acclaim came anyway. Her second book, a quiet, intimate portrait of life at the school, of the children who found refuge within its walls, and of the quiet lessons learned between the lines of daily life, gained unexpected attention. Critics called it tender, wise, beautifully unvarnished. Readers embraced its authenticity, and soon Jamie found her name resting on the tongues of strangers. She did not chase the applause. It arrived at her doorstep nonetheless. When she hesitated to share this success, Ethan would gently remind her, with a knowing look and a quiet hand on hers, "Your story isn't just yours anymore. It belongs to the ones you've touched. Let them see what they've built with you." So Jamie read chapters aloud to her students, wove pieces of their journey into her conversations, and found peace in letting her words move beyond her careful grasp. Not long after the book's release, Elon Musk surprised her with a gift that left her silent with gratitude. He had funded and overseen the creation of a new library for the school, a luminous space filled with towering shelves, sunlit reading nooks, and tables built by local craftsmen. The entrance bore a simple wooden sign, the Harper Family Library. When Jamie first stepped inside, her chest tightened. She trailed her fingers along the freshly cut wood, inhaled the quiet scent of new pages and polished oak. "This is more than I ever imagined," she whispered, her voice catching. Elon, standing at her side, his hands resting casually in his pockets, offered only a soft smile. "It was always yours." The library became the heart of the school, a place where stories settled into the walls, where students found themselves in pages they might not have otherwise known they could enter. The family story continued to unfold in beautiful, ordinary ways. Maya's children, now older, stepped naturally into roles as mentors to the younger students. They moved through the classrooms with the quiet confidence of those who had been shaped by this place and were now shaping it in return. Ava, balancing her growing family and her creative spirit, prepared for her first solo art exhibition, a collection that wove motherhood and memory into sweeping, textured canvases. She often painted late into the night, her hands moving with quiet urgency, her heart full. Jamie celebrated Ava's growing voice in the art world without hesitation, reminding her that one could be both fiercely present in family and boldly present in personal ambition. "You don't have to choose," Jamie told her one afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the studio windows. "You've already built a life where both can live." Beneath the steady rhythm of their days, another thread quietly tightened. Michael Harper's health began to falter. The man who had once seemed unshakable now walked more slowly, his voice softer, his hands more fragile. The sisters gathered close, creating unspoken schedules to ensure he was never alone. They sat with him in the sun-drenched garden, read to him in the afternoon light, shared meals that lingered long into the evening. In those moments, the family's love was not loud or rushed. It was steady, folded into the texture of daily life, a kind of love that had learned patience. Jamie often found herself walking by the lake in those weeks, the weight of her father's fading strength pressing gently but persistently against her ribs. She contemplated the cycle she had come to know so well: love, loss, growth, and the ache of letting go. Ethan, ever patient, ever steady, urged her to keep writing, not the polished stories, but the raw, vulnerable pieces she often tucked away in drawers. He believed the truest work was found there. But Jamie struggled. "To write it all feels like standing without armor," she confessed to him one evening, their steps slow along the garden path. "Maybe that's the point," he said gently. "Maybe that's where people will truly find you." Ava's art exhibition arrived quietly but carried great weight. Among the portraits was one that stole the air from Jamie's lungs. It was a painting of the three Harper sisters, not as children, not idealized, but as they were, complex, strong, carrying the visible marks of time and love and loss. In the brushstrokes, Jamie saw the texture of their lives, Ava's bold resilience, Maya's quiet steadiness, and her own layered journey of carrying others while learning to hold herself. The painting found its permanent home in the school's library, where it hung near the entrance, a silent testament to their shared history. Elon's role within the school quietly deepened. He became a trusted advisor, guiding Jamie through decisions about future expansions and helping secure the school's long-term stability. His counsel was not loud but essential, his friendship one of the few constants that had never wavered. As Jamie worked on her next manuscript, she wrote a heartfelt dedication to Bella, her sister whose memory remained folded into every corner of her life. For Bella, whose music still lingers, whose quiet courage still shapes us. The words felt right, like a long-threaded needle finally pulled through cloth. Michael's voice, though weaker, remained a guiding force. "Carry what I've taught you," he told his daughters one evening as they gathered around him. "But carry it your way. I never wanted you to follow me. I wanted you to surpass me." The sisters, sitting close, their hands linked across the space between them, felt the weight and the freedom of his blessing. They would carry his wisdom, not as a burden, but as a steady light, knowing now, more than ever, that their story was still unfolding, its pages rich, its chapters still being written. The morning Michael Harper passed away, the house was unusually quiet. His daughters, his grandchildren, his sons-in-law, all had gathered in the home that had held their stories for decades, their footsteps soft, their voices hushed. But Michael had always taught them that life was not to be mourned in silence. It was to be lived fully, remembered deeply. He left this world surrounded by the faces he had cherished most. Jamie, Ava, and Maya held his hands, their children sitting nearby, leaning into the familiar comfort of family. It was a passing marked by tenderness, a farewell without fear. His final breath was not a surrender but a gentle release, a man content with the seeds he had sown. In the days that followed, grief folded itself into the rhythm of their lives. The house filled with visitors, with shared stories, with the fragrance of familiar meals carefully prepared by neighbors. The family mourned him, yes, but they also celebrated the quiet strength he had passed on to them, the lessons that lingered in the spaces between his words. Jamie found her refuge in writing. Her tribute to her father was not grand or public. It was personal, a letter folded into a story, a gentle recounting of the man who had never sought to shape the world loudly, but who had shaped his family completely. She wrote of his patience, his steady presence, the way his wisdom had always arrived not as thunder, but as steady rain. Through her grief, Jamie's responsibilities at the school remained. It was Elon who stepped in quietly, easing her load with gentle efficiency. He managed schedules, mediated disputes, and oversaw the school's daily flow, all without asking for thanks. His presence, like Michael's once was, became a silent pillar of strength. In his steady, reliable way, Elon made sure Jamie had space to grieve without losing the foundation she had built. Maya found her own way through sorrow, anchoring herself in the gentle constancy of her family. She poured herself into the lives of her children, raising them with the same quiet, deliberate care her father had once given her. She took comfort in teaching them not just to be kind, but to be present, to sit fully in the moments life offered. Ava's art, long a steady pulse in her life, began to reach beyond their small town. Invitations arrived from distant galleries, each recognizing the intimacy and raw honesty of her work. Yet, even as her paintings found homes in cities she might never visit, Ava's feet remained firmly planted in her family's soil. Her success did not pull her away. It only deepened her gratitude for where she had come from. Ethan, ever steady, became Jamie's quiet refuge. He did not rush her through her grief or fill the silence with solutions. He walked with her, sat with her, listened when she spoke, and stayed when she didn't. His presence was not an escape from sorrow, but a companion through it. The school flourished under their shared care, its halls alive with the footsteps of students, its classrooms warmed by sunlight and laughter. It grew not just in size, but in heart, quietly carrying Michael's spirit of compassion and resilience. His lessons lived on, folded into the school's daily rhythm. Jamie, in the late hours when the house had settled into silence, began compiling her writings into a deeply personal volume. It was a collection of memories, of letters, of small reflections that had often been scribbled in the margins of her life. It was not written for acclaim. It was written to hold on to the quiet truths that had shaped her family. Elon's unwavering support continued, his investments ensuring the school's long-term stability. His friendship to Jamie remained one of the rare constants, a bond built not on the past they almost shared, but on the life they had chosen to build side by side. Maya's children, once little hands tugging at her skirts, now stepped into roles of their own within the school. They became leaders, their mother's steady voice and their grandfather's quiet integrity woven into their choices. Watching them guide the younger students filled Jamie with a profound, bittersweet pride. Often, she found herself walking to Michael's grave, a quiet place near the edge of the school grounds, beneath a tall oak that caught the morning light. She would sit there, speaking softly to him, sometimes simply resting in the silence, finding comfort in the stillness. Ava, too, paid tribute in her own way. She dedicated a new painting to their father, a wide, textured piece that depicted the roots of an old tree stretching deep and wide, anchoring an unseen family above. It was a portrait without faces, but it told their story just the same. The sisters, though each now carrying their own households, remained closely knit. They gathered often in the home that had once been Uncle Harper's, sharing meals that stretched late into the evening, their conversations weaving between memory and present joys. The house never again felt empty. One evening, as the sky folded itself into soft twilight, Jamie walked the school grounds with Ethan. They moved slowly, the sound of their footsteps blending with the faint rustle of wind through the trees. "I still hear him sometimes," Jamie said softly, her hazel eyes focused on the horizon. Not his voice exactly, but his patience, his rhythm. Ethan's hand slipped gently into hers. That's the best kind of legacy. They walked on, side by side, their pace unhurried. Jamie felt the weight of loss, yes, but she also felt something else, a readiness, a quiet anticipation for what would come next. Her story, like her father's, would not be told in grand, sweeping gestures. It would be told in the careful work of daily life, in the hearts she continued to hold, in the stories she continued to write. And as the seasons of her soul turned, she found herself grateful, not just for the chapters she had lived, but for the ones still waiting to be written. The school gates opened to a new season, and with it, a fresh wave of students, their faces bright with curiosity, their energy spilling across the garden paths and echoing in the hallways. Jamie Harper welcomed each one with steady warmth, remembering that beginnings, though familiar, always carried their own weight. The rhythm of the school had deepened over the years. It was no longer a fragile dream. It was alive, rooted in the lives it had touched. But Jamie knew that growth, like stories, required tending. As she guided the new students through the school's traditions, she felt both the weight and the gift of being their keeper. Ethan Blake, her constant partner in both work and life, gently nudged her towards something new. "You've written our family story, Jamie. Maybe now it's time to tell the story of this place, what it's meant to you, what you've built here with them." At first, she resisted. Teaching consumed her days, and the idea of translating her daily lessons into words felt almost too close, too raw. But Ethan's quiet encouragement lingered, and in time, she realized he was right. There were stories within these walls waiting to be gathered, not just from her past, but from her present. One of her most cherished students that year was Elon and Ava's child, now a curious, thoughtful presence in her classroom. The boy was bright but not without stubborn edges, quick to question, quick to push, much like Elon himself had been as a young man. Jamie found herself gently guiding him with the same patience she had once needed from her own mentors, delighting in his sharp questions and earnest wonder. When Maya's grandchildren began to visit the school regularly, Jamie felt the full stretch of time settle sweetly into place. 3 generations of Harpers now moved through the same halls, bridging the distance between past and present with the simplest gestures, a hand offered in welcome, a story passed from teacher to child, from sister to sister. Eager to foster deeper community ties, Jamie and Ethan began hosting literary nights at the school, inviting students, parents, and townspeople to share poems, stories, and personal reflections beneath the soft glow of lanterns. These gatherings became treasured rituals, nights where the hum of shared stories wove neighbors into friends, where children sat beside elders, each one leaning forward, waiting to be carried somewhere by words. Ava's creative spirit flourished during this time. She organized an art fair on the school grounds, filling the garden and classrooms with student projects, her own pieces, and displays from local artists. The fair became a vivid blend of color and curiosity, a place where education and creativity danced together freely. Elon's quiet generosity continued to shape the school's future. He quietly established a scholarship fund, ensuring that students from all walks of life would find a home within these walls. He never sought recognition, preferring instead to move in the background, steadfast as always, his quiet friendship to Jamie a source of steady comfort. Among the new students, one in particular caught Jamie's attention. Sophia was fiery, independent, and stubbornly resistant to help. She reminded Jamie of herself, so much so that it sometimes startled her. Sophia questioned everything, tested boundaries, and often sat apart from the others, her eyes sharp with something Jamie understood all too well, the ache to be seen and the fear of being misunderstood. Patiently, Jamie worked to build trust. She stayed after class for quiet conversations, offered challenges that stretched Sophia's thinking without crushing her spirit. Slowly, Sophia softened, allowing Jamie to guide her. In doing so, Jamie found herself healing parts of her own restless youth, realizing that sometimes the most important lessons come not from being right, but from standing beside someone long enough for them to find their own way. In moments of self-doubt, those nights when the weight of decisions pressed heavily against her ribs, Jamie turned to Maya. Her sister's words, always measured, always gentle, steadied her. "You don't have to hold everything at once," Maya reminded her one evening, as they walked the familiar garden paths. "You've built a place where others can carry pieces of it with you." Jamie's heart eased in those conversations, grateful for the quiet, unwavering circle of family that still surrounded her. One morning, Ethan surprised her with a new laptop, simple and unadorned, but with a note taped to the top. "For the stories you haven't told yet." It was a gesture that nudged her gently back to her writing. And so, in the evenings, after the school had settled into its soft nighttime hush, Jamie returned to her desk. She began a new story, one not about the past, but about the winding, imperfect paths of forgiveness, of growth, of what it meant to let people see you fully. Ava's art continued to gain recognition, her name now traveling beyond Palo Alto. Invitations arrived, praise followed, but Ava remained grounded. She chose again and again to stay close to home, to her family, to the quiet joys that had always filled her life with the most meaning. Elon remained a pillar of strength in the community, his humility never dimming, his support always present in the background like steady sunlight. His friendship to Jamie was one of quiet knowing, a shared understanding of responsibility, of the weight and beauty of tending to something larger than themselves. Through letters, visits, and simple daily exchanges, the sisters continued to nurture their closeness. Their bond had weathered time, loss, distance, and joy, and it now stood as a testament to the kind of love that chooses to stay, season after season. As Jamie watched the new class settle in, as she listened to the laughter in the halls, as she walked the garden paths alongside Ethan, she reflected on the cycles that had shaped her life. New students, new stories, always arriving, always unfolding. And yet, beneath the changes, something enduring remained. Love, family, purpose, steady roots that, no matter how far the branches stretched, always anchored her home. The decision to introduce the school's first artificial intelligence class arrived quietly. It wasn't announced with banners or grand speeches. It simply appeared on the new term schedule, nestled among literature, art, and mathematics. But in the town that had embraced the Harper School for its warmth and tradition, the idea unsettled some. Jamie Harper knew it would. Change often walked softly, but carried a long shadow. The pushback began with murmurs. Some parents feared that machines would soon overtake what they cherished about education, the human connection, the heart that had always set the Harper School apart. There were meetings, long conversations, questions that trembled on the edge of accusation. Jamie stood firmly, though not harshly. She listened. She understood their fears. And then she gently made her case, not as a technological crusader, but as a teacher who had always believed that curiosity should never have locked doors. "We're not replacing heart with code," she told them one evening in a crowded community hall. "We're expanding the way we prepare our children to face the world. The world will move forward with or without us. I'd rather our children walk forward with it, carrying both compassion and skill." Her words stirred the room, but the resistance lingered. When Elon Musk publicly supported her decision, his quiet but respected presence shifted the tide. He didn't grandstand. He simply stood beside Jamie at the next school meeting and spoke plainly. "I've built a life on technology," he said, "but the most valuable lessons I've ever learned came from people like Jamie, teachers who see the human first. I trust this school. I trust her. And I believe our children can learn new things without losing who they are." His support carried weight. Slowly, the resistance softened. Ethan Blake worked alongside Jamie, introducing progressive teaching methods that invited students to think independently, to question, to explore solutions rather than memorize them. His classroom became a place where curiosity bloomed, where the uncomfortable became exciting rather than frightening. Maya volunteered to mentor the younger children, offering not only lessons in arithmetic and language, but quiet guidance in resilience and kindness. She became the steady, nurturing figure many students gravitated toward, her calm voice and gentle patience shaping their early days. Ava continued to weave her artistry into the life of the school, donating her time to teach art classes that expanded the children's horizons beyond their textbooks. Under her guidance, they painted their questions, sculpted their uncertainties, and learned that not all answers arrive in neat, written lines. As Jamie navigated the shifting landscape, she began to write a series of essays advocating for AI education. She wrote not with technical jargon, but with warmth and clarity, weaving stories of her students, of the school's growth, of what it meant to balance innovation with compassion. Her words stirred thoughtful conversations, reaching beyond the school's garden walls. Elon quietly helped her publish the essays on X, ensuring they reached audiences far beyond their small town. Her words traveled across borders, sparking respectful debates and quiet nods from those who recognized the courage in her approach. Amid these forward steps, Jamie and her sisters often found themselves reminiscing about their own girlhood. They spoke of the doors that had once been closed to them, opportunities, rooms, ideas that had been quietly reserved for others. They marveled at how, in their own way, they had walked through those doors and left them open behind them. One afternoon, a familiar face returned to the school. Caleb, the once fiery student Jamie had mentored years ago. Now a young teacher, he sought to give back to the place that had steadied him. His return was more than a personal victory. It was a testament to the school's growing influence, its quiet revolution reaching far into the next generation. In the soft light of early evenings, Jamie and Ethan would walk the school grounds, dreaming aloud about what the future could hold. They envisioned greenhouses, art wings, technology labs that hummed with discovery. They spoke of a school that would never outgrow its heart, even as it stretched toward new possibilities. But amid the hopeful rhythm, life's quieter threads continued to pull. Maya's health began to falter. It wasn't sudden. It arrived like the slow shifting of seasons, almost imperceptible until the days began to shorten. The family noticed her pauses, the way she rested her hand against a chair just a moment longer, the slight tremble in her voice when she grew tired. They drew closer, not out of fear but out of reverence for time. Meals lingered longer, letters were answered more quickly, and the simple act of sitting together became a quiet form of gratitude. Elon arranged for additional support for the school, ensuring Jamie's vision would not falter should she ever need to step away. His friendship remained constant, a steady, thoughtful presence that asked for nothing in return. Ava balanced motherhood and artistry, gracefully navigating the ebb and flow of her creative life and her family's needs. She found fulfillment in both, no longer feeling she needed to sacrifice one to honor the other. When the school celebrated its anniversary that year, it was not a grand affair. It was a warm, familiar gathering. Students, former teachers, neighbors, and families filled the garden. There were quiet speeches, shared stories, and the gentle unveiling of a simple plaque honoring Michael Harper's legacy. Jamie felt his presence in the steady hands that had built this place, in the faces of the children who now thrived here, in the laughter that danced through the school halls. As the lanterns glowed softly into the evening, Jamie looked around at the family, the students, the community that had grown around her. The world was moving forward, yes, but they had found a way to move with it, together, without losing what mattered most. Quiet revolutions, she realized, are often the ones that last. The school was a living archive, its walls filled with echoes of lessons, laughter, and the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. Jamie Harper had spent years tending to this place, nurturing its growth, shaping its future. But now, as another spring unfolded across the garden paths, she felt a gentle pull toward the past. She began to compile a book, a family memoir, woven with the stories of the school and the people who had shaped it. It was not simply a history. It was a tapestry of moments, the early, tender days when the school barely stood, the hesitant first steps into AI, the small triumphs, the heartbreaks, the simple afternoons that had somehow built the foundation of their lives. Yet writing this book was not like her others. These stories belonged to people she loved, to days she had yet to fully understand. Sometimes the words came easily, pouring out like well-worn memories. Other times they halted, caught between her heart and the page. Ethan Blake became her quiet anchor during those moments. He would sit beside her in the evenings, his hand resting over hers, his voice calm. "You don't have to finish it all at once," he reminded her. "Some stories ask to be told slowly." Elon Musk became an unexpected contributor to her work. On one of his quiet visits to the school, he surprised Jamie with a small box filled with old letters, photographs, and handwritten notes, snapshots of days long past, of Elon's earliest connections to the Harper family. "These belong in your story," he said simply, placing the box on her desk. His voice, as always, was steady, unhurried. "They've always been part of it." Jamie sifted through the contents carefully. Faded photos of school gatherings, letters her father had exchanged with Elon's grandfather, candid snapshots of the Harper sisters in their younger years. Each piece carried the weight of memory, the kind that shapes not only the past but the present. Ava Harper, ever the storyteller with her brush, began to work on a new family portrait. But this time it was different. It wasn't just the sisters or their children. Ava painted Jamie's students as part of the extended family, their bright faces interwoven with the familiar ones. In her eyes, the school and the family were no longer separate, they were one. As Ava painted, the seasons turned more quickly. Maya's health declined in quiet, inevitable ways. The family noticed the subtle signs first, the pauses, the careful pace, the way her smile lingered longer, as if she was holding on to each moment with deliberate tenderness. The family drew closer. Time became their most precious offering. Jamie's bond with Maya deepened in those weeks, their conversations slow, filled with memory and gentle humor. They spoke of their childhood games, their shared losses, the stubborn resilience that had shaped them. "You've carried so much, Jamie," Maya said one afternoon as they sat beneath the garden's old oak. "But you've always known where to plant new roots." Jamie tucked those words into the quiet corners of her heart. Ethan, ever thoughtful, organized quiet picnics and long walks, knowing that nature often softened the weight Jamie carried. In the open fields and under the trees, she found a place to breathe, to remember without rushing forward. Elon's steady presence continued to be a comfort. He visited often, never demanding space, simply offering it, walking the garden paths with Jamie, leaving thoughtful notes on her desk, helping where he could, always in his quiet way. Meanwhile, Ava's artistry blossomed again. She painted a new series inspired by the seasons at the school, the budding spring mornings, the golden hum of summer afternoons, the crisp autumn walks, the hush of winter's arrival. Each painting captured not just the school's beauty, but its rhythm, its enduring life. In her classroom, Jamie began to teach her students about the importance of storytelling, not just as art, but as preservation. "Stories keep people alive," she told them, her hazel eyes steady. "Not just in history books, but here." She gently placed her hand over her heart. "Stories remind us where we came from, and sometimes they show us where we're going." As Maya's final season unfolded, her children and grandchildren gathered closely, surrounding her with warmth, laughter, and simple presence. There were no grand gestures, only the steady comfort of love, fully given and fully received. When Maya passed away, it was peaceful, a gentle release, much like their father's years before. Her life had been a testament to quiet strength, to enduring devotion, to the beauty of showing up for others. Jamie's grief came in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes sudden. But this time, she didn't pull away from it. She let herself feel the full weight of what she had lost, and in doing so, found the courage to finish her family story. She poured herself into the completion of the family memoir, weaving Maya's life into its pages with careful, loving hands. The final chapters were not just about sorrow, they were about the ways Maya had shown them how to live. The school dedicated a new garden in Maya's memory, a place of quiet reflection and growth. Beneath the soft blossoms and along the stone paths, students would pause, teachers would rest, and families would gather. Maya's spirit lingered there, not in statues or plaques, but in the living, breathing space where life continued. In time, Jamie found comfort, not in moving on, but in moving forward. Her work, her family, her students, they held her steady. The stories she had once hesitated to tell now carried her, unfolding with each season, each page. The Harper family story continued, not as a closed book, but as a garden still blooming. The book, when it finally arrived in readers' hands, was simple in its design, a pale cover, a soft illustration of the Harper garden on the front. But the stories inside, Jamie Harper soon discovered, resonated with a power she had not anticipated. Her family memoir, quietly compiled over the years, found its way into the hearts of readers across generations. They wrote to her, strangers and former students alike, thanking her for telling a story that felt, somehow, like their own. The pages held not just her family's legacy, but the pulse of love, loss, resilience, and quiet hope that women, mothers, teachers, and daughters everywhere seemed to recognize. Ethan Blake was the first to place the finished book on her desk, his fingers brushing the cover as though it were something precious. "You've always had a voice worth hearing," he told her softly, pride woven into his words. "You didn't just tell a story, Jamie, you've left a light behind." His support, steady and unspoken for so many years, was now a quiet celebration. They spent long evenings together on the porch, their conversations folding gently into the rhythm of their shared life, their silences warm and easy. Elon Musk, always a thoughtful presence, quietly organized a community celebration to honor not only Jamie's memoir, but the Harper School's enduring legacy. He arranged for the garden to be filled with soft lanterns, for the school's halls to display Jamie's handwritten pages, drafts, and photographs that had shaped her family's story. The evening drew neighbors, students, friends, and old teachers. They gathered not for speeches, but for remembrance, for laughter, for the simple act of sharing in what had grown from seeds planted long ago. Elon moved quietly through the event, never seeking the center, but always making sure that everything ran smoothly. Ava Harper's art exhibition became the celebration's quiet centerpiece. Her work captured the Harper sisters through seasons of youth, love, and motherhood, painted moments of the ordinary that now glowed with new reverence. Ava's brush had always known how to find the softness in the everyday, and in this exhibit, she blended family and creativity until they became indistinguishable. The school itself had grown with them. The sisters' children now stepped naturally into leadership roles, guiding new students, planning future programs, and slowly becoming the stewards of the Harper family's mission. Jamie watched them with quiet pride, knowing that their hands would shape the next chapters. Her students, now adults, parents, even teachers themselves, began to return to her. Some visited the school, others wrote long letters, but all carried a common thread: gratitude for the space she had created, for the lessons that had stretched beyond the classroom. Each message reaffirmed what Jamie had come to know deep in her bones: this life, built from gentle choices, had been meaningful. Elon and Ava's child, now grown, prepared to take over the school's day-to-day operations. Jamie watched him with calm affection, recognizing the same spark she had once seen in Elon, a quiet determination paired with a steady kindness. She knew the school would be in loving hands. Passing the torch did not feel like a closing. It felt instead like the natural rhythm of life moving forward as it always had. Jamie stepped back with confidence, not out of weariness, but out of trust. Ava's final gift to Jamie arrived one afternoon, a portrait carefully wrapped and placed by her door. When Jamie unwrapped it, her breath caught. Ava had captured her, not as a teacher, not as a sister, but as she truly was, a woman quietly holding space for stories, her strength woven through softness, her resilience worn openly and without apology. The portrait now hung in the school's entrance, not as a monument, but as a welcome. The Harper family's annual reunions became deeply treasured rituals. They gathered beneath the oak trees, children running between picnic blankets, old stories retold with familiar laughter, the air filled with the sounds of belonging. These reunions stitched the family's past and future together, a living tapestry that no single chapter could ever contain. In these gatherings, Jamie found a quiet joy in witnessing the next generation's curiosity and resilience. She no longer felt the need to direct their stories. She simply marveled at their unfolding. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan led her to the edge of the school grounds where he unveiled plans for a library expansion, a shared dream they had once tucked away for a quieter season. It would be a place filled with stories, not just of the Harper family, but of the children who would pass through its doors long after Jamie was gone. They stood together, side by side, their hands clasped, their hearts full, the weight of the years between them both sweet and steady. Later that day, Jamie found herself walking the familiar path that led to the lake, the place where she had once come to grieve, to think, to dream. The water, calm and glassy, reflected the sky with the same patient rhythm it always had. The tall grasses rustled gently in the breeze, and the air smelled of earth and distant pine. She sat on the weathered bench, feeling the soft weight of the years settle around her like a shawl. The chapters of her life had unfolded in ways she could never have planned, losses she would have never chosen, joys she would have never dared to imagine. The seasons of her life had come full circle. She had loved fiercely, taught deeply, and allowed herself to be changed by the people she had walked alongside. And as she sat by the lake, listening to the wind threading softly through the trees, she realized she was not the end of her story. She was simply in another beautiful season. The pace of Jamie Harper's life had softened, like the gentle hush that follows the first snowfall. She no longer rushed to meet deadlines or worried over the timetables that once shaped her days. Instead, she welcomed the rhythm of slow mornings and familiar paths. Her life, once filled with urgent plans, had settled into something quieter, something deeper. There was a comfort in the way sunlight now filtered through her kitchen window. The smell of warm tea steeping, the soft creak of old wooden floors, the weight of a favorite sweater draped over her shoulders, these small rituals shaped the heart of her later years. They were not grand, but they were steady. Ethan Blake tended the garden with quiet patience, his hands still capable, though time had softened their strength. He often whistled low melodies as he worked, carefully pruning, planting, and pausing to show Jamie the small sprouts pushing through the soil. "See this one," he'd say, crouching near a new bloom. It took its time, but it never stopped growing. Their days unfolded like this, slow, intentional, filled with gentle conversation and the quiet companionship that years of loving had gifted them. They no longer needed to chase the world. The world, it seemed, had come to settle around them. Elon Musk remained a constant friend. He visited often, always bringing stories from a wider world, his humor sharp, but his presence always grounding. Time had silvered his hair and softened his gaze, but the steadiness Jamie had once admired in him remained unshaken. Their conversations drifted easily between memory and the present, old stories, quiet laughter, and thoughtful silences. Elon would sit on the garden bench, a cup of tea in hand, sometimes watching Ethan at work, sometimes simply enjoying the easy comfort of being in Jamie's company. Elon and Ava's child, now grown and steady, had officially taken over the school's leadership. Jamie watched with quiet pride as the next generation brought fresh energy and bold ideas to the Harper School. The new head spoke of innovation, of community, of continuing to balance technology with human connection. It was a vision Jamie recognized and gently encouraged, though she had begun to practice the art of stepping back. She offered guidance when asked, mentorship when invited, but she also allowed herself to learn the delicate skill of letting go. Her wisdom was now offered like an open hand, never a closed fist. She trusted that the school's future no longer needed to be carried by her alone. The Harper School had become something remarkable, a place where tradition and progress coexisted gracefully. It stood as a beacon for AI education across the country, known not only for its innovation but for the warmth that remained at its core. In their quieter seasons, Jamie and Ethan began to revisit places from their early years together. The bookstores where they had once argued over literature, the quiet lakeside paths where they had dreamed of what the school could become. The visits were slower now, the steps more measured, but the memories carried them with ease. Elon and Ava continued to host family gatherings, drawing children, grandchildren, students, and old friends into the Harper fold. The house that once belonged to Uncle Harper now thrummed with the vibrant energy of new voices and familiar laughter. It was a place where everyone belonged, where the Harper spirit endured. Former students often returned, now adults with stories of their own. Some had become teachers, others artists, engineers, parents. They spoke with Jamie not as pupils, but as equals, their gratitude evident in the way they still called her by name, their memories colored by the lessons she had once tucked into quiet afternoons. Maya's garden had flourished beautifully. The new generation of students tended it with care, their young hands shaping the soil, their laughter echoing in the pathways that Maya had once walked. The garden had become more than a memorial. It had become a living classroom, a place where patience and nurturing still bloomed. One morning, Ethan led Jamie to the new wing of the school. The library expansion, his long-promised surprise, was finally complete. As they entered the space, Jamie's breath caught in her throat. The library was bright and spacious, filled with shelves of donated books that stretched towards sunlit windows. There were soft reading corners, community tables, and tucked among the shelves, quiet spaces for reflection. At the far wall, Ava had painted a final mural, a visual tapestry of the Harper family's legacy. The mural was extraordinary. It showed the sisters as children and as women, the school through its many seasons, the faces of students past and present, and in the center, the garden, always the garden. It was not a history frozen in time. It was a story still unfolding. Jamie ran her fingers gently along the edge of the nearest shelf, feeling the grain of the wood, the weight of what had been built. In the days that followed, the family gathered for a quiet celebration. There were no speeches, no grand ceremonies, just shared meals, soft music, the simple joy of being together. They honored what had been, what was, and what was still to come. Sitting in the garden afterward, Jamie reflected on the long, winding path that had brought her here. She had loved, she had let go, she had begun again. The seasons had turned, each one leaving something behind, each one preparing her for the next. Looking around at her family, her sisters, her students, her lifelong friends, Jamie felt a quiet, enduring sense of contentment. Her story was not ending. It was simply being carried forward by others. The Harper School, the family they had built, the love they had shared, all of it would continue, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing part of the world. And so, with the soft breeze rustling through Maya's garden and the sunlight stretching across the worn paths, Jamie smiled and let the season turn. The rhythm of Jamie Harper's days had slowed. Her health, once steady as the seasons, had begun to wane. The walks that had once carried her briskly across the school grounds became shorter, her breath softer, her steps more careful. Yet her spirit, the quiet fire that had guided her through a lifetime of stories, lessons, and love, remained unshaken. Ethan Blake and the Harper family surrounded her with a tenderness that needed no instruction. They knew how to sit with her in silence, how to speak softly when her energy faded, how to fill the air around her with warmth instead of worry. It was a love expressed not through grand gestures, but through steady presence, through the simple but sacred act of staying close. Each morning, Ava brought Jamie fresh flowers, carefully gathered from Maya's flourishing garden. Lavender, peonies, wild daisies, sometimes arranged thoughtfully, sometimes offered in a simple bundle of color. Jamie would inhale their scent, a quiet smile warming her face. "You always bring me the seasons," she would whisper, and Ava would squeeze her hand in return. Elon Musk visited often, his voice now a familiar comfort. He began the ritual of reading aloud to Jamie, not new books, not the works of others, but Jamie's own stories. Her words, penned decades earlier, returned to her through his calm, steady cadence. He read to her of the sisters' childhood, of snowy mornings, of garden paths, and lakeside reflections. In his voice, the past and present wove themselves together. The children of the school, knowing of Jamie's gentle decline, filled the hallways with letters and drawings, colorful, misshapen, brimming with affection. They crafted a collection for her, stories, poems, small pictures that spoke of gratitude and love. Some were simple thank yous. Others told the tales of how Jamie's kindness had shaped their lives. The bundle of their work rested by her bedside within easy reach. Jamie continued to write, even as her strength ebbed. Her final journal entries were not lists or memories, but quiet letters, words of love, words of thanks, words left carefully for those who would walk the paths she could no longer tread. She wrote to her sisters, to her students, to Ethan. She wrote of contentment, of peace, of having lived not a perfect life, but a full one. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the windows, Ethan promised her that he would remain by the school's side, that its doors would always remain open to curious hearts. "I'll keep it safe," he whispered, his hand resting over hers. "I'll keep your story alive." And Ava and Elon's grown child, now the heart of the school's daily life, made a quiet vow to carry Jamie's vision forward, to honor not just her memory, but her way of seeing the world, with patience, with compassion, with unwavering hope. As spring lingered, Jamie asked for one last afternoon by the lake, the place where so many seasons of her life had unfolded. They gathered there, the family she had built and loved, Ethan by her side, Ava nearby, Elon sitting cross-legged in the grass, their children and grandchildren softly moving around them. The water shimmered, the breeze was gentle, and the air carried the peaceful hum of trees. Jamie sat quietly, her hands resting in Ethan's, her breathing steady but delicate. "I have no regrets," she told him, her voice soft but clear. "Only gratitude. I would choose this life again." As the sun drifted lower, surrounded by the gentle sounds of laughter, the rustling trees, and the familiar hush of the lake, Jamie Harper's story reached its final page. She passed peacefully, embraced by the world she had shaped, the people she had loved, the echoes of lives she had touched. Her family gathered in the days that followed to honor her, not with grandeur, but with simple, heartfelt ceremony by Maya's garden. They planted new flowers in her memory, their roots now intertwined with the stories that had grown in that soil for generations. The Harper School continued, its walls filled with the voices of children, its gardens blooming, its halls quietly echoing with Jamie's enduring spirit. Students passed beneath the mural Ava had painted, a brilliant, tender tapestry that now stood as a permanent window into the Harper sisters' world. In the mural, Jamie and her sisters remain forever together, captured in color and light. There is Ava with her brush, Maya among the garden paths, Bella near the piano, and Jamie at the heart of it all, holding a book close to her chest, her gaze warm and steady. Time would move forward. The seasons would continue to turn. New students would walk the halls, new stories would unfold. But the foundation, the love, the courage, the quiet defiance of little women who became something more, would never fade. And as the story closed, its final scene lingered on the simple, gentle turning of pages, a legacy not bound by an ending, but carried on by those who dared to keep telling the story. What about you? Did this story awaken a memory, a person, or season in your life? I would love to know. Please share your story in the comments. I read and treasure every single one.